Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box.
Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back to another week at the 4th Box podcast. As you know, we were out of town last week, so we had a little bit of a family trip, or at least a mini family trip. Pops and I were on the road, so we're happy to be back in the 4th Box studio, the virtual Buckman Tavern, this week, and we are once again joined by a guest who we will bring on in just a moment. In the meantime, Pops, I'll send it over to you to get us started.
Okay, great. Greetings, friends, patriots, listeners. As always, we are very happy to be coming to you, as Bree mentioned, once again from the virtual Buckman Tavern. You might recall that is the place on the Lexington Green where the brave patriots gathered and were there the night before the shot heard round the world, April 19th, Patriots Day, 1775. The shot that started the American Revolution. And we here at the 4th Box like to gather and discuss important issues of the day. And we are certainly happy to have a guest with us tonight to get into some of that. Before we do a toast tonight, I want to give a big shout out to our dear friend and participator in several previous podcasts, Magic Mike up there in South Dakota, you might recall, who brought us many good discussions related to the carbon capture pipeline and otherwise. Magic Mike had undergone a fairly serious medical procedure and has come out successful and in good health. So we're praising the Lord for that. Also, I have a note related to an individual, despite facing felony criminal damage charges. Ed Kale from Arizona said he has absolutely zero regrets about taking out a flock camera by backing his pickup truck into the pole and sending the vision of the camera up into the sky. And apparently that has reached a level of felony now. So I guess the government is making sure any pushback against the surveillance state is going to be dealt with in a felony type matter. Seems a little extreme to me, as having been in law enforcement for some time, but that's exactly what has happened. And the individual says he has no regrets.
Cheers.
Our quote for tonight: "The foundation of authority is laid in the free consent of the people. The choice of public magistrates belongs to the people by God's own allowance." And that was in a speech given by Reverend Thomas Hooker of Connecticut as early as 1638. So we like to try to reflect upon quotes from various individuals, founders, and otherwise that shine a light on what was being strove for back in those days. And that comes from 100 years plus before the Declaration of Independence. And if you can indulge me for one more minute, our moment in history from 1776, the Battle of Long Island took place toward the end of August. It was the most significant battle of the war up till that point, and certainly since the signing of the Declaration back on July 4th. And the landing force of Brits pushed the colonists, the American patriots, back to Brooklyn Heights in that skirmish. The patriots actually got roughed up pretty significantly in that exchange, but they regathered at Brooklyn Heights and the war continued. So that is our moment in history from 1776.
Awesome. Great. Good shares. Thanks for all the good toasts. Super happy to hear about Magic Mike, the quote. And of course, we love the moment in history and kind of seeing what was going on 250 years ago. This thing that we keep hearing about and seeing all the signage about all over the place. All the businesses are boasting about 250 years, but do they even know what they're celebrating? So we like to just kind of peek our heads back towards what was really going on then and, memorialize it, appreciate it, and try and draw upon the strength of our ancestors. Because I think if we had more of that, we'd be in a much better place today. So that is going to really tie in nicely with the guests that we're bringing on. Today, we're joined by Dr. Chase Spears, a combat veteran, former U.S. Army public affairs officer, writer, educator, and leadership and communication coach. Dr. Spears now writes and speaks on leadership, communication, public policy, military accountability, and faith. He is the host of Finding Your Spine, a weekly podcast featuring conversations on issues ranging from military mandates and institutional bureaucracy to censorship, education, Christian institutions, and conservative political organizing. So, Chase, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Hey, Bree and Blaze, it's awesome to be with you. I appreciate the invitation, and we've been talking about it for a long time, so this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, us too. I think we have a lot of crossover in the things that we talk about, the things that are important to us, so I think it's going to be very exciting. I know that my intro for you was pretty abbreviated with your background, so to get us started, of course, we would love for you to elaborate that a little bit more and tell us about your background, where you came from, and what led you to doing the things that you're doing today.
Well, man, the opportunity to talk about me, who passes that up? I am a grateful child of God, a husband to my college sweetheart, father to 5 amazing kids. Those are the things that I count the most important in my life. Along the way, what my story is, I grew up kind of a lower end middle class family, but was raised to love the Constitution, was raised to love the founding fathers, the founding values, the Christian informed statecraft values that our nation came out of. And my mother homeschooled me and my brother and really, really emphasized those things. So those were always very close to my heart. I planned for a career actually in journalism because I thought that was a way that I could try to make a living serving, because I always wanted to do something missional. And the Lord kind of ended up having other plans for me. I ended up in the Army in 2003, right at the height of things going in Iraq and Afghanistan. I thought I'd have 1 4-year enlistment working on public affairs, which is kind of the military equivalent to civilian public relations. And that turned into a 20-year career. Had some great experiences, had some rough experiences, did some great things, did some hard things. I went to war, and along the way began to see the difference between the narratives that we hear and the realities that we face, especially in the military context. And so it was that really drew my interest into writing and starting to really dig into civil military relations, the history of it, the frictions of it. And I found out very quickly that the Army doesn't like their spokespeople writing things that question, like, where are we and how did we get to where we're at, and are we really on the target that we say we are? Add to that the COVID madness that the military just went head first into in 2020, really through about 2023. And I realized I need to move on. I can't be a spokesman for an organization that is so enthusiastically corrupt in this regard. Add to that, under the previous administration, all the work that they were doing to use the military as an agency of social change, particularly when it comes to the extreme sexual tangents of the left. And I was like, you know what? The Lord calls Christians to serve in all places at all times. Daniel, I was talking to my pastor today. Daniel served in Nebuchadnezzar's court. Nebuchadnezzar, not a good man. And but I couldn't find anywhere that I was biblically told to stay as a spokesman and a public apologist for evil. And so we moved out. We moved on. I've been out of the Army coming up on 3 years now. I've really been privileged this last year, coming up on, we're a little over a year in actually now, working with the Herzog Foundation on the Finding Your Spine podcast, which calls men and women who share an affection for truth to live it, to demonstrate it, to not be in hiding. And I write on those topics, and I try to call other people who share our values, who share our conviction about what time of day it is, and what right looks like. To not be afraid to advocate for those things, to not be afraid to live those things out, whether it be home, workplace, if necessary, church. And that's the mission path that we're on. And we're fully committed to it, and we're having a great time.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And it's, for me, the first thing that I hear and think about as you describe this is that this strong, powerful, respected institution, one of the greatest institution, I think many would say, in our country, you felt like you were out of alignment with when it came down to truth. That's kind of startling from like the civilian perspective, to look into this military entity and recognize that truth was something that you were not connected to in that space.
It's surprising to a lot of people, because the military has such a long storied history of being an honor profession, of being a service profession. And what I mean by profession, I mean that term very, very deliberately. Like, what are professions? Professions are things that you have to be uniquely credentialed to do. They're things that are self-policing. They're things that serve a higher good. That's why lawyers are called members of the legal profession. Physicians are called members of the medical profession. There is the profession of arms. And militaries throughout history have done some really good things. They've done some bad things. That's just human nature. That's the fallen post-Genesis 3 world that we're in. But the US military has had a reputation, at least for our lifetimes, and this ebbs and flows, and I won't bore you with going into the history of it. There are moments where it doesn't have that reputation, but it has in our lifetimes, especially since Desert Storm, of my childhood. And Bree, I don't know if that predates you or not, but I know Blaze will remember it. And when people find out just how dark things got in the military, it's always surprising to them. And then it's surprising to me that it's surprising to them, because those of us living in it, this is the fight that we're in every day. These are the storm clouds that we see driving into work every day. This is a reality that when you're in uniform, you can't escape. And so we're surprised, like, how in the world does the public not realize? And that's a great indicator of just how disconnected the public is from their military. And there's this almost dismissive idea that I sometimes run into with some people who say, "Hey, well, you know what? You knew what you signed up for, so don't complain and just take whatever." And that's not how we should be, because when you adopt that mindset, you invite a mercenary force. And that is precisely what our founders were concerned about, and why they did not want large standing armies. And that's literally, when you look in the Constitution, there's provision for a standing navy. There's not a provision for a large standing army. That's why the National Defense Authorization Act has to be passed again every year, because there's not actually a constitutional framework for this large industrial complex that we have.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Dad. I know you've got something on that one.
Well, very, very curious. Having worn a uniform for a short time through the National Guard and have been experienced to the boot camp and some of those things. My first question is, how do you end up in public affairs, or was your previous background aligned with?
That's what I came in the Army to do. So I studied journalism when I did my undergraduate degree at Lee University, went on and studied journalism at the University of Tennessee at the graduate level. And I came in the Army specifically to do that job. And I was actually very nearly complete with a master's degree, and I enlisted, and my family thought I was crazy. They're like, "Oh, you have a college degree, you can be an officer." And yeah, I could have been, and I ended up becoming one later on. But I came in the Army because I wanted to do that job. I wasn't worried about what's the rank, do I get saluted or not, do I get the extra pay. I came in wanting to do that job, that very job, because this is what my passions were. This is where I felt I could contribute the most to the fight. And very quickly thereafter, I was enlisted for 3 years, and then my brigade commander made it abundantly clear he wanted me to become an officer, and I didn't want to let him down, so I did. But yeah, that's what I came in to do, and I'm kind of a unicorn in that regard for an Army guy. In the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps, you can come in as a brand new second lieutenant as a public affairs officer. In the Army, you can't. In the Army, you have to do a what we call a basic branch, whether that be armor, artillery, infantry, quartermaster, the ongoing list. And then after you've been a few years, you can compete through a board process to come over to public affairs because they start hiring usually at the captain level. They're beginning to experiment with some lieutenant accessions now in the Army, but that's still not a widespread practice. So it was kind of funny. I'll never forget when I got to my very first brigade assignment. I was in an airborne infantry brigade up in Alaska, and my commander is looking at my file in the Army. You get this 1-page resume. Essentially, it's called your ORB, your officer record brief, and it has the list of your assignments and your awards and your badges and all that stuff, where you've deployed to, all that. And he's looking at it and he sees I've been in communication roles my entire career as an officer, and it just threw him. And he's like, "What do I do with you?" And I'm like, "You make me your communication director." That's what I'm here to do. That's what we do.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I think you probably went in a lot more clear-eyed than most of us did. We didn't know anything about MOS or where we were going to end up. We just kind of went in and basically ended up as a ground pounder at that point when you didn't have any background to lead you in. But more importantly, I'm wondering, when you went in, did you understand your oath of office that we all took when we put on the uniform? And did you use that to challenge the establishment at all?
I was very deliberate about knowing what the oath of office was and knowing what it meant. There are too many people who take it, they just take it passively. They take it as just a rote thing, a rote saying without really thinking. And I saw that so much in the latter years of my career. People who were actively working to undermine the oath, and yet they would swear the same oath at the same ceremonies and at the same promotions that the rest of us did. And I thought, well, how can this be? And that's actually why a couple of years ago I wrote an article called "The Case for a Constitutional Training Culture in the Military," because we don't have enough military members who truly understand what they swear to. I held those words sacred, and I still do. I still believe that I'm held to that oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That hasn't changed. I'm still an American, and I'm still, as far as I'm concerned, a soldier, just fighting on a different battlefield now for the Constitution, which is deliberately why we left when we did. But this is a problem. When you look at the litany of trainings that military members have to go through, I'll just give you some examples in the Army. Every year you have to go through equal opportunity training, which uh, is a well-intentioned training on its face, but in recent years has become really kind of a Marxist struggle session training. Equal treatment of persons, which is just another derivative of that takes up more training time. Um, they call it SHARP, sexual harassment and response prevention. Uh, you have to take every year. And there's just, I could go on and on and on and on and on. All these classes you have to take, and you're required to take them manually in the Army. And if you miss it, your bosses come looking for you, because that stuff is tracked very closely on spreadsheets and it's briefed at command and staff meetings. And you miss it, like someone is coming to get you and drag your butt to the next one that's offered, because heaven forbid you're more than a year beyond your last one of these trainings. Now, some of them are legitimate, some of them are important, but a lot of them really aren't. But my argument is, if we're going to have all of these things that we have to do every year, why don't we take an hour every year and say, all right, what does the Constitution actually say? What does that oath actually mean? Have you actually read it? Okay, we're going to stop for an hour. Everyone gets a pocket Constitution, and you sit there and you read that thing cover to cover. It's not a long document. I've got a few of them sitting here on my desk. It's an easy to read document. And we need more people to do that, because there are a lot of guys and gals who do get it. They understand the Constitution. but there are far too many who have no clue. And we saw, I mean, y'all remember General Milley, General Mark Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under Trump administration 1. And that dude would use the Constitution as his blanket for literally committing treason. And he would say, "Well, I'm defending the Constitution." Dude, you haven't read it if that's what you think.
100%. I love your idea. In fact, not to stray too far, but having taken the oath right out of high school before I was even 18, and then again as a police officer, I would say the same thing would be very appropriate both for the military and for law enforcement, because we did not look at it either in law enforcement. And I think that is probably done by design, because if all of us were out here educated on it, and therefore becoming a louder voice, expecting the higher ups to live up to it, it would become very threatening. So I think that's done. I think that's done completely by design. But I absolutely love the idea. We are very much into promoting the Constitution and studying the Constitution here at the Fourth Box. It's what we started this whole thing on, and we continue to promote that today. And we promote people getting the Citizens Rule Book, understanding the similarities that were acknowledged when the Declaration was first written, and how the Constitution was the framework of government to set up to support that thing. There's so many wonderful things in there, and if people don't read it and understand it, and I think the high schools should have that same mandate. In fact, they do. Any learning education institute in the country that receives federal dollars is mandated to give instruction on the Constitution, but we know what that looks like, having had kids go through school not that long back, and the only instruction they received on the Constitution was when I was allowed to go in and give them an hour's worth, which is nearly not enough. But I love that idea, and I think everybody should be exposed to it, because we'd be a lot more capable of defending it.
We should be, and I'll tell you, you're dancing all over another topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that is education. And there's a reason why the government school, I don't even grant them the public school system, because I can tell you, I can drive up to our local public high school during the day and say, "Hey, I'd like to come and use the facilities or inspect," and they're going to laugh me out the door and call the police if I don't leave. It's not a public school system. It's not there for the public. It's not open to the public. It's not accessible for the public, to the public. It's only paid for by the public. It's a governmental school system. And it does what it does very deliberately. In 2020, we had a lot of parents all of a sudden see some of the craziness their kids were being indoctrinated with. I won't even grant it the word taught, indoctrinated with, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, it's bad, it's bad," and they thought that was an exception to the norm. The purpose of a system is what it does. It's doing what it does by design, because a truly educated populace, an informed populace, is a populace that is prepared to be free. And when you have a populace that is prepared to be free and to exist in a framework of constitutional ordered, God honoring liberty, you can't control them. And they want people who can be controlled. They want people who are separated from their ancestors. They want people who have no clue of the history of where they come from. They want people who can't read and write and reason and think. They want people who have never read a classic. They want people who have never heard of names like C.S. Lewis or Thomas Paine. That they want that, because those people are easy to manipulate. They're easy to control. Then they're easy to have to fulfill your purposes. I mean, that's why we're looking at right now a big part of the rise of the DSA. Why we have young people who have no clue where they came from.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah,
Bree,
so many. Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So many good points already. A lot of what you're talking about that I find interesting is that these concepts of truth and standing for the Constitution and being educated on the Constitution are concepts that, from what I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you found to be more effective advocating as a civilian rather than as an officer in the Army. And to the point that you both were making, Civilians are not required to take any oath to the Constitution, but those enlisted in the Army are. So that's a pretty weird juxtaposition when you look at those things side by side, that in the role that you took an oath to the Constitution to, you had less ability to be impactful in preserving it than you do in just a role as a civilian on the street who took no oath to it at all. That should be cause for concern, I think, to anyone listening to this.
Bree, you're just opening up the strangest paradox of what the military says it does versus what it enables its members to do. I'm sure you've both heard of this concept of the apolitical military, the non-political military, and that's a fanciful notion. It's not a real thing. It's not grounded in history. It's not grounded in military philosophy. It's entirely a product of about the last 80 years coming out of the Second World War. The when we came out of the Second World War, basically the nation said, okay, fine, we're going to do this large standing military because we had taken the army apart after the First World War. And then 20 years later, we're back at war again. The nations that we thought were going to play nice didn't play nice. And we decided, okay, fine, we're changing our whole outlook. We're going to be this global police force. And into that comes a brilliant political scientist by the name of Sam Huntington, who wrote many great works, but one of them was titled The Soldier and the State. And in The Soldier and the State, he proposed 4 different models of military control. One of them he titled Objective Civilian Control. And under that framework, he theorized, he did not say, this is, thus saith the Lord Almighty, this is how it is. He theorized a model in which military officers would abstain from getting directly involved in domestic politics, which was a massive reversal from the historical trend. Military officers had always been overtly, openly political. It was understood because war is politics by their means, as Clausewitz said. And so he theorized this model and never said this is how it actually is. He just said this is probably what we might want to think about as we go into having this large standing force, so that we don't have the military basically being able to run roughshod over the domestic politics of the nation. Reasonable thing to think about, reasonable conversation to have, and his nightmares have come completely true. But out of that, a lot of people who frankly don't think nearly as deeply as Huntington over the decades have said, because this idea was put out in this book, we have this apolitical military. Well, there's no such thing as an apolitical military. The military enables policy. It creates policy. It is the executor of national policy when other means of influence fail. It's how it's always been. It makes choices. It picks winners and losers. It plays roles in which governments are allowed to stay in other nations and which ones are razed to the ground. That is some of the rawest forms of politics. And why I give you all that background is because we have this verbalized culture in the military of, well, we're apolitical, even though we're doing politics in everything that we do and we're surrounded by politics. But we put on these blinders, we don't think about it, and we just wholesale buy this fictional narrative because it sounds good. And into that framework, into that culture, when you bring up things like, hey, we need to stand true to the Constitution. Hey, we need to push back on communists invading the nation. Well, now you are a service member called, oh, you're getting political. You're getting political. You're getting political. And it doesn't matter whether you're saying, hey, I voted for Trump and I like him, or whether you're saying we should fight communists. Now, if you anything that you say, even if you can directly connect it to your oath, you're accused of being, oh, now you're being political. And there is no worse insult. There's no worse vulgarity that you can receive as a military member today than to be called political. That carries such castigating value. And so it's an indicator that we have officers who don't know how to think. And I would push back on that and say, it's political that I'm saying we should literally not support communist ideologies in the force. Yes, that is a political statement that's directly in line with my oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. But there's this but there's this cowardly culture of, well, we just don't talk about any of it at all. And that's part of what I write about, and I try to push people on. As a matter of fact, literally an hour ago, there's this Facebook group. I'm as a public affairs guy, I'm a graduate of the Defense Information School, DINFOS for short, and there's a DINFOS alumni Facebook page, and there JD Vance, the vice president, was just inducted into the DINFOS Hall of Fame, which makes total sense to me that you get a vice president. Yeah, you're probably going to put him in your Hall of Fame. That's just kind of how things work, regardless of whether it's a Republican or Democrat. It's going to happen. And the public affairs career field, like civilian PR, is overwhelmingly left of center. And so there were a bunch of people in the group just lamenting and throwing all sorts of poo at the wall verbally. And the guy who runs the group came in and made a comment, made this whole post about he's trying to keep politics out of the page, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote and said, hey, I understand what you're trying to do, but politics is inseparable from military life, everything that we do. And that's just how it is. And he came back at me and said, I disagree. I can't imagine anyone being a good member of this group who would say that politics is involved in all things. And I'm like, read a book, dude.
Yeah.
Read a book.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that people are responding in this way towards this idea when I know that something that was a big deal for you, and you even mentioned it very briefly earlier, was the COVID era. 2020 on, that was a very politicalized thing. That became all about politics, and look at the impact that had in the military. So it feels a little bit counterintuitive to say that we're distance ourselves from the idea of politics while then making everything about things like COVID and all the DEI stuff, which is completely tied to politics. All of that was about politics and what side of politics you were on and so on. So it just kind of feels like maybe that in itself is an example of one of these things that doesn't align with truth, because it's a lie. It's a lie to pretend that politics isn't attached to what you're doing in the military when these things that played such a big role in the military are directly influenced by politics.
You're spot on. And this goes to the lack of thought that's put into these topics, even in a lot of military so-called intellectual circles. Politics at its most basic form is about who is going to rule. That's what it is. And I abhor Karl Marx. I hope there's like a special carve out in hell for that man for all the damage he's done to the world. But one thing I'll grant is he understood power. And he understood that power is the means by which those who want to rule the world control it. And there are many people throughout human history who have used power for good. They've used power for bad. Power by itself is not a bad thing. When you look biblically, like we have three institutions created by God: family, government, and church. And they're all there for our well-being. Government of the state does things like traffic control signals. And that is an element of common grace to keep me from hopefully being broadsided going through an intersection. And everything about the military is inherently political because of that. And it's just we need to get away from this pretend fantasy land that we have in which we say, well, the military needs to be apolitical, and but it's okay if they do these kind of politics. And you go into the COVID topic, that was absolute rule. That was people being tested. That was, will you go along? Will you buy the false narrative? Will you get in line? Because if you won't, you're now an outcast. We got Old Testament really, really quick in 2020. In this day and age, our living generations like to pretend we're so enlightened and we're so much better than the barbarians of the past. And we would never do that like our dumb ancestors did. We would never do this like our illiterate ancestors did. These are the silly things that we say. Our ancestors were brilliant. They were building cathedrals, and we can't even make a pretty office park anymore.
Yeah.
COVID was the ultimate test of that. And I'll never forget, if you had questions, because I had questions. it was like Old Testament style of you're dirty and we're putting you outside the city camp. You're the
Hmm.
problem now. And it really in all aspects it was a religion. What constitutes religion? Do you have a high priest? Well, we had one. Do you have a canon? The science? Yeah,
Hmm.
we had one. And does it enforce church discipline? Oh, did the COVID code ever enforce church discipline across all the institutions? And the military was one of the worst at it. As a matter of fact, it kicked over 8,000 brave patriots out of the force. Tens of thousands more walked with their feet voluntarily, like I did, out of disgust, out of deciding I can't be a part of an institution that would do this to fellow American patriots. And another one of the myths, Bree, we talk about the apolitical myth. Well, here's another myth for you. There's a myth that all those who were kicked out had been brought back in and been made right. It is not anywhere near the truth.
Hmm. Yeah, as you describe that, I certainly have to look through to the influence of media. It's all promoting the agenda, which to me is leaning the country towards socialist and communist tendencies. The mind control that was employed, and I think was recognizable in the military. If you were castigated because you stood up and said, I have some questions, and you were poo pooed and shoved to the side, I think that is the very thing that the military should be standing in support of, along with everybody else that ever took that oath to office. Our commitment is to preserve and protect what the founders put in place to assure our personal liberty, and they were the ones trampling it the most. It just seems so far out of touch, and you wonder now, is this because of generational lack of education or indoctrination, as you correctly pointed out? Is it because of all the mind control stuff that we are exposed to daily through other media sources and other things in society? I have to believe it's a collection of all things. The bread and circuses were fed unendlessly with all of the stuff they keep us distracted with while they are plundering our wealth and burdening our children insurmountable debt that they'll never get out from under. It just seems like we have somehow lost our ability to think for ourselves.
And there's this great adage that strong men create good times create weak men create hard times.
Amen.
And we're at the bottom of that cycle right now. I am hopeful that maybe before the Lord closes my eyes and I'm underground 10 toes up, that maybe I'll get to see what the hard times creating strong men looks like. But we'll see. The providence of God is going to do what the providence of God will do, regardless of who is or is not in power right now. And I take great comfort in the reminder that all things are teleological. And by that, I mean that all things will inevitably end towards what God is willing to allow. And doesn't mean I always like the things that we encounter on our way, but things have been tough historically before, and they're tough historically now. But there have been times of even greater suffering than we have now. What differentiates us is the speed of communication and technology, but none of those things make us bigger than the Lord Almighty. And so I do take comfort in that. But you're absolutely right, Blaze, that so many people are that well, we have generations now who've gone through the governmental indoctrination system. So they don't know what it is to be free. They didn't get a classical education. They weren't exposed to the liberal arts. They don't know how to reason. They don't know how to think clearly. They don't know what their family tree is. They have no clue what their ancestry looks like beyond their parents. Maybe some of the smarter ones, their grandparents. They have no idea from where they came. They have no idea where they need to try to be going. Everything is about utilitarian needs right here, right now. How do I just make it through this day? And we've gone into this way of life in which a baby is born with nothing, comes into the world with nothing, and then is raised, whether it be a poor parent, rich parent, and then they strike out on their own. They go to college and they get a job and they spend their entire life working to try to earn a nest egg to retire on. The government tells them, hey, you should get out of the workforce and quit at 62, which, by the way, is a completely unbiblical concept. And by that, I'm not saying that you should be 94 and working on an assembly line, but I am saying you have a duty other than to being on your couch making sure cable news works from the time you hit 63 moving forward. And they spend the entire nest egg, and then kids kick them into a nursing home when they get old rather than bringing them in, and the nursing home finishes liquidating the estate, and then the next generation starts over with nothing and no
Yep.
connection to what came before and no wealth transfer from before, and they're entirely dependent upon who can sell them the best vision of the future politically, and no one has yet been able to deliver on those goods, whether it be Republican or Democrat. And they don't know because they're just living for today, and no one's thinking about tomorrow. And I am weird in this day and age that I'm trying really hard to think about tomorrow, and I think that should be the norm, not the exception.
Amen.
Yeah, well, we're fully in agreement with that. I think that, we feel that the answer to these problems that we're discussing here, the things that you're bringing to our attention, both in the military and outside of the military, could be answered by the very title of your podcast, Finding Your Spine. I think there's a lack of courage. There's a lack of accountability. There's a lack of independence. And I don't mean that in, we are America, we are independent. I mean, independence in ourselves, individualism, and self-reliance. There's a lack of all of these things. So I just love the name of the podcast so much. And I would love if you could just kind of define what that means to you and the importance of that message in fixing all of these things that we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, Bree, thanks so much for bringing that up, because I do love the title of that the podcast. It's not because I came up with it, but because it's a story. Like you look over my shoulder here and you see my coins. Why do I love coins? Because they're stories. Every one of those is a person, a place, a time, a moment in my life. And the title of that show is no less that. My last couple of years in the military, when I would begin advocating that we need to speak back against lies. And I wasn't saying we need to be boisterous. I wasn't saying we all need to be Matt Walsh, and that's no hit on Matt Walsh. That man's an American hero, and I love him, and I read him, and he's on my bucket list of people to meet, right? But I'm a much kind of lower key personality, and I was still advocating we need to stand for truth. We need to not accept these lies about the remaking of what human anthropology looks like. No, there is no such thing as a transgender person, and if there was such a thing, that doesn't enhance military fighting readiness. We need to push back on basic lies, because we are supposed to be an honor profession. We're supposed to be a profession that holds for the truth, that holds for the line, that holds for the defense of what is good about America. And I would find over time that colleagues of mine who agreed with me would say, hey, I agree with you, but I can't be seen agreeing with you. Or I like what you're doing, but I can't be seen in public with you now because of the things that you say, the things you write. And these were always, whispered in around corners or sent through DMs or emails. Never, a lot of times not even spoken in person at the office, because people deliberately knew that being seen with me might be problematic, because I was becoming that political guy for saying basic truths. And at the beginning, I understood, because I know what it's like to take the hits, because the hits came pretty quick. I took hits from national level. I started getting death threats at one point even. It's not fun. There are things that come with what I do that are not enjoyable. But
Sure.
It is, you can't escape it. It just is what it is. And I over time, my sympathy turned into kind of a lack of patience, but trying to be a generous lack of patience, and saying, hey, you know what? If instead of hiding, y'all who say you believe with me, like joined me on the line, they would realize that they're actually the ones surrounded, not us. But of course they wouldn't do that. And then my what I hoped was gentle patience turned into, I'm just totally done with these people. You swore an oath to the Constitution. You said you're a warrior. You said you would stand between a hostile nation and a bullet. You said this, you said this, you said this. You say you hold these convictions, and you're a coward about it. You need to find your spine. And that's why I started telling people. And so when I came up with the idea for the podcast, I thought that's what it's going to be about. And a funny side story is I didn't actually want to do a podcast. I enjoy writing. When you write, it's really easy to fix comma splices and editing and to change this form of voice and to reorient paragraphs. As you all know, when you do this, there's going to be some ums and some uhs and, oh, I mispronounced a word. And you can't really hide very well when you're doing this. And I was like, I don't want a podcast. And a lot of people encouraged me. And then the Herzog Foundation offered an opportunity to bring some fresh ideas for their network. And because so many people, my wife included, said you really should do this, I had already come up with a concept, and they were just so amazingly supportive. But I mean, yeah, the title, Finding Your Spine, it is a direct lived experience of what my last 3 years in the military were like, of feeling surrounded by people who said one thing but wouldn't stand up for it. And if you're not going to stand up for it, then what good is it speaking it? If it's not a value worth suffering for, it's not a value worth having.
Yeah.
Right, well,
Amen.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, while you were discussing that, Jason, and part of the last little segment we had there, one of the thoughts that occurred to me, and I think we could kind of lump it all together. You know, you see the deterioration amongst the military as you're just describing, where your fellow soldiers wouldn't stand up for the very thing that they swore. And I think when I was thinking about that as you were describing it, I think in order for there to be an all powerful state, and I think there is an effort using all branches of the government and all pieces of the government to become all powerful, I think the family has to be destroyed. The faith-based community has to be destroyed. Any kind of community networking and community support has to be destroyed for the state to become the all-powerful being. And I think the people are indoctrinated and mind-controlled into just going along with that instead of standing up, no matter how obvious the violation of their oath is. And that goes all the way back to having never been instructed on it. The other thing, going way back in the conversation and talking about the military distorting truth, I wondered if you could offer a comment specifically on the USS Liberty, for example.
I'm just barely aware on that one. Can you get me up to speed?
Okay, well, the USS Liberty was a military vessel, obviously in the Middle East, that was attacked for hours by Israeli aircraft after it was identified as an American ship. And it has never received full disclosure by the U.S. military. It has been covered up. There was many people killed on that ship. It was back in 1967, and there's been voices that have come out to try and get this thing fully vetted. And basically, they've been pushed into the corner like you were if you're standing up for learning about COVID before you accepted the shot. And I just wondered if you had because the military has a history of distorting the truth, in particular when it comes to pounding the war drums. And I would suggest that probably where we're at today has been a large distortion of truth, both at the Ukraine theater and over in Iran.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely you're hitting on a theme that's true, and it frustrates me that it's true. I actually just did a long form post about this on X last week about the way the Army lies, and it has just become a normal way of life, a way of doing business. That why settle for a truth when a lie will do? Some of the work that I've done has talked about how the Army lied about Bo Bergdahl's capture in Afghanistan. I don't know how or y'all are of that or not, but I have some close contact with that issue, and I saw the deception up front, and I argued that we should be open and transparent back before Rolling Stone and Daily Beast basically forced the Army's hand on it. And it's the one time I'll give a high five to those publications. That was like the one time they did us a solid as a public. And it's a shame that the Army had to be outed by such a weird group. And I saw that time and time again. That was one of the discussions we have a lot in the public affairs career field. Do we inform or do we influence? And the answer is some of both. But at the end of the day, we should always be about the truth. And I've worked for way too many people who were comfortable with lies of commission or lies of omission when it wasn't necessary. And I that is just a frustrating feature. I don't want to say everyone who's in the military is a liar. There are a lot of great people in the force, but inevitably the military is a corporate entity now, and it works to support its own interests, and its own interests are served by continual warfare, because that's the system that we have created on how colonels become generals, and how 1 stars and 2 stars become 3 stars and 4 stars. We have created that. I'll never forget when Afghanistan fell, or 5 years ago now, and that was hard to watch. And that hit me very personally as a veteran of that campaign. And I told my wife in the kitchen after that went down, I said, mark my words, there will be another war and another major conflict somewhere. I don't know when, I don't know where, but it will come, and it will come soon. How do I know that? I know that because I know the defense contracting agencies that hold a lot of properties right in Crystal City, Virginia, which that's right across the street from the Pentagon, for those who may be unaware. I know they don't want their property values to fall. And I know all the colonels who want to become generals, and all the generals who want to become higher level generals. Well, they're just accustomed to you have to be at war for the promotions to continue at rapid rates. And so the military will ensure that there is ample reason for it to be engaged somewhere. Now, am I saying the military created these conflicts? That's not what I'm saying. No, but I'm saying there's a vested interest now for our military to ensure that it always can be used overseas, rather than being focused on security right here at home. And it's a major problem. It's a major problem to me, and it should be a major problem to you, and it should be a major problem to every listener and every American, that we keep sending our military overseas to fight other nations' wars, and then we have to go through terrorist screenings to get on airplanes. Tell me how we're safer.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah, there was very powerful voices from the past, Smedley Butler and Eisenhower and others, who warned of where this was going way back when, and it certainly has manifested.
Yeah, I mean, and where is the Smedley Butler today? I don't know. Where's the Eisenhower today? I don't know. I'll tell you, I've spoken out about a lot of stuff in the military. I am aware of 2 full colonels, 06s, who pushed back on COVID lies in the military. I'm aware of 2 colonels. 2. There are a lot of colonels in the force. I'm not aware of a single active duty general officer who pushed back. And there isn't a single one who was on active duty during that time that's since retired. They'll still come out and say mea culpa, because they still want to be in the club, and to remain in the corporation's goodwill requires you to still play the game to some extent. And that remains true in spite of the fact that we have a great Secretary of War right now, because the machine still serves its best interests.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. So I've got just a couple more questions. This one I would really like to get in, and it's, I guess, a loaded question, and in a lot of ways you've answered the question already, just not in so many words. So I'll ask you just straight up, do you believe that we can exist as a free nation at all without people in the military or otherwise who are willing to exercise courage in this way?
No, I think you have to have a courageous population, and you have to have courageous defenders of that population to remain free. Because if you don't, you're going to be run all over. The wolves are always out there. The world never runs out of predators. I mean, I know this is going to sound silly in scale, but just yesterday, for example, I came downstairs, and we have some chickens out back. And my hens, they're all like huddled together in the coop, and they're all just squawking. They're mad about something. I'm like, what in the world is going on? And I walk out there, and it turns out we had an owl in the tree looking down at them. And I went and chased the owl off, and it just was second nature to me. But I got to thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's what protectors do. And the owl was not going to hurt me. It was not a courageous act by any means. It was kind of
Sure.
entertaining for me to, go yell at an owl and watch it fly away. When I really would have loved to just stood there and looked at it. It's a magnificent creature. But you always have to have guards on the gate. And if the guards on the gate aren't willing to be courageous, if you won't stand up to a basic truth that marriage is between a man and a woman, that there is only one two sexes, and it's the one that God assigned you at birth. If you won't stand up for basic things like that, how will you stand up when the missiles fly? How you stand up when the bullets are flying? How you stand up when the tanks come rolling? And so now you free societies require brave, courageous people, and that's been a truth for all of history. Look at Samson in the book of Judges. If you don't have brave people willing to stand the gate, you can't have a free society. It's impossible.
Yeah, great answer, great response. Thank you for that. Dad, I thought you were about to jump in there, so if you got another, feel free.
Well,
we're kind of running short on time.
Yeah, a little bit unrelated to much of the discussion, and this went by really quick. I think we could probably have you on again and really get into some good topics, but I wanted to, if you would elaborate on your doctorate. What are you a doctorate in?
I hold a Doctor of Philosophy, a PhD in Leadership Communication from Kansas State University. I started that program while I was still active duty and did it over the course of 5 years. I was really grateful to do it, really grateful it's done. But I went into the program because it merged leadership and communication, two of my favorite topics to talk about, think about, read about, study. Now, I will say what I found once I got deep into the program was it's not really much of a leadership program. It's much more of an activist generating program, which I was much to my disappointment. But by the time I realized that it wasn't a one-off of a class here and a one-off of a class there, but this is what the actual program was designed around, I was so far into it that it was like, well, if I quit now, I'd have to start all over at another school, and I don't want to do that. And the nice thing about most doctoral programs are, regardless of what the title is, you really set your own research agenda and you set the tone of what you want to actually study. And so while there was a lot of stuff that I had to become very familiar with that I don't care for at all, it turned into a great educational opportunity for me, not only because I'm in this, R1 program, but because I needed an antidote to the darkness of much of the readings that I was having to do for the coursework there. And so I counteracted it with reading great works. And that's where my actual education came from. And that's what I wrote most of my dissertation from. And so it's funny enough, people would look at it and say, okay, well, you're trained in leadership and communication. Well, I mean, I'm just trained in those things because of being a military officer and being a PAO. What I loved about the PhD was it actually got me into policy analysis. And that's what my dissertation ended up being, was a work of policy analysis, exploring the realities of the political nature of the U.S. military, and going back, it basically is a 200-page work that encapsulates the early part of our discussion about the fact that the military is a political agency. It's naturally political. It's not a dirty thing to say it. It's not a controversial thing to say it. It is the nature of warfare. And here is the historical military philosophy behind it. And here is how that silly notion of an apolitical military is weaponized against conservatives in the ranks. And so it was great fun to write that dissertation. A lot of people talk about dissertation writing like it's not an enjoyable process. And if you don't like your topic, it wouldn't be. I loved my topic, so I had a great deal of fun with it.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, I certainly appreciate you sharing that with us. Just was curious. And I would like to say on my behalf that I think you're putting it to good use. I love the name of your podcast and your efforts in standing up against an institution that obviously was tilted very much against you when you stood up for your own individual rights and made some comments about that. And that's all things we here at the Fourth Box are encouraging others, and we firmly believe an educated population is the only one that can stay free. So you touched on many, many things that I think we here at the Fourth Box would totally align with.
Yeah.
Well, It was fun. Every question you asked, I was like, this is the stuff that I love to talk about. So I can just do this as long as they'll have me.
Awesome. We love that. Well, like he said, we certainly have you back on. I think there's so many things we could dive into further. Before we let you go for the night, I would love if you could just give our listeners a few practical everyday ideas for how in their own lives they can live more courageously and lead boldly in their families and their communities.
I'd love to. Well, I'll tell you, the first thing you've got to do is you have to make it a discipline. You run your life or your life runs you. And part of knowing truth is immersing yourself in truth. If you're not reading scripture on a regular basis, you should. If you're not reading a great book once in a while, you should. If you're not having deep conversations with people about deep topics that challenge you, that you're afraid that you're going to sound like a dummy talking about because you don't really know it well, you should, because those are the ways that you learn. And then you have to actually start practicing taking a stand. And I'll tell you, it's one thing for me to be in this season of life, and I have the podcast, and I take some very public stands, and I took some very public stands in the military when it was really hard to do so. That didn't come natural to me. I had to work my way up. There are some people we look at and they've got their wonderful stories, and it's like they just came out of the womb, with a spear in hand. That's not me. I'm one of those guys. It was on the job training for me. It was necessity of being able to look myself in the mirror for me. And once I took a little stand here, and I found out I could survive, and that was another little step, and another little step, and still a climb up a never ending stairwell. You have to take that first step. So what listeners can do, like when someone's trying to tell you something that's clearly not true, you respectfully push back. And if they won't take it respectfully, then you forcefully push back. You say, the lies stop here. Let the lie come, but not through me, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. You have to put it into practice one step at a time. And you have to know whose you are. You have to know who you are, and you have to know whose you are. I'll say again, you have to know who you are, and you have to know whose you are. And I take great comfort in knowing that the Lord has me. And it doesn't make me arrogant, and it doesn't make me feel invincible. But I know that if I'm standing on the side of truth, even if that means there's suffering on this side, well, that puts me in some great company. And then I seek to be the kind of man that when I lay on my deathbed, should my kids be there for me to say one last goodbye to, that I'll be able to look at them and hopefully say, hey, I did everything I could to keep the flame alive. Whether it's alive or not, I did everything I could. And I would encourage your listeners to begin to try to inculcate that kind of attitude.
Very powerful. That was amazing.
Perfect. Is there any place you'd like to tell our listeners where to find more of your work?
I'd be happy to. Well, my website is chasespears.com. That's a good place to start. I keep a listing of most of my writings there, and my podcast appearances, anything I do in terms of media. I try to keep cataloged there. So that's chasespears.com. There's also a contact form there if people want to reach out to me. I also can be found on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Substack at the handle at Dr. Chase Spears, at Dr. Chase Spears. And then my podcast is the Finding Your Spine podcast, which is available on all the major podcast listening services, as well as YouTube. If you're having any trouble finding it, you shouldn't. It's pretty easy to find. But if you're having any trouble finding it, you can always go to my website, chasespears.com, and you can click on the Finding Your Spine podcast link, and it'll take you straight to it. So those are all the ways to find out the mischief that I'm up to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chase. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think you brought up so many incredible points that will hopefully open the eyes of some of our listeners. I know there were a lot of things you talked about that certainly opened my eyes in different ways. And there's so much alignment between the mission that you're on and the mission that we're on. And I always think the more connections we can forge with like-minded people, the better off we all are. So thank you so much for your time and the work that you're doing.
It was a joy to be with y'all. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much for the great conversation and for the work you're trying to do to inspire other Americans to take full advantage of this gift of liberty that we've been given.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. Well, before we wrap it up with you, Pops always closes us out with a Bible verse, so we would love if you stayed and join us for that, and then we'll sign off for the evening.
Okay, for tonight, for God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. And that is 2 Timothy 1, verse 7.
Perfect. Thanks, Dad, and thanks again, Dr. Chase Spears. We hope to chat with you again in the future.
That would be awesome. I'd love it.
Alrighty, have a good rest of your evening.
Nice meeting you.
God bless.
Cats.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. So that was Dr. Chase Spears. I thought that was so great. I think we kind of bounced around a lot, but the theme stayed the same. We talked about the same key subjects throughout the episode, and that was that the things that are going on in our highest institutions in this country do not align with truth, do not align with the Constitution, do not align with Christianity. And this is something that we as citizens of this nation should put our effort into. This is something we should put our focus on. And this is something that we should dedicate our own lives to in fixing where we can. And I think he gave some perfect examples. I always love when our guests give us examples at the end of things that we can do, because we hear so many different things, and his were very simple, scripture, reading a good book. And I think the big one is just taking very small stands to get started. He brought up so many good points about lies and taking one lie at a time. Just respond to one lie at a time. Stopping a lie, even a small one, is a powerful and important mission to be on. I think that's a really, really good takeaway for our listeners. So I was really happy he shared that. And the last message he shared with us is you need to know who you are and whose you are. And that so perfectly puts into perspective the things that I think we really try to speak on and share here with our listeners every week. So just, again, another huge thank you to him. And anything else you wanted to add on that, Dad?
Well, a man of great commitment and courage. I mean, to be in the military and be standing against, one of the greatest forces on earth, but to be voicing your opinion when you knew something was wrong, but everybody else was swimming downstream, and to be basically standing on an island. And there was a few, but there was very few that actually stood up and pushed back, and many of them walked out, as he ended up doing himself. But it took great courage and commitment to continue to push back despite all of the forces being lined up against him. So very much enjoyed the conversation myself. He was very well aligned with a lot of the things that we have, starting right out of the gate with the Constitution and his commitment to the Constitution. I found that we were getting off right on the right foot right away. And the name of the podcast, Finding Your Spine, is absolutely something that we've been suggesting for a long time. So a lot of alignment there, and would certainly be interested in having Dr. Chase Spears back again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for our listeners, of course, as you know, we will put all the links to everywhere you can find him in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. As always, another big cheers to Magic Mike for coming out of surgery okay. I'm sure we'll speak with him again in the very near future. And you guys know the drill. Like, subscribe, share. Until next week, stay vigilant.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.